Hello and welcome to Birth and Baby Talk. I'm Leanne Palmerston from Hamilton Family Doulas, and I'll be your host this week. And this week, we're talking about the Bishop score. Have you ever heard of this? If you've already had a baby, there's a chance you may have heard about this, and it may have been mentioned to you in relation to, nearing or just passing your due date, getting an exam from your midwife or your doctor, and then making some decisions around, whether to plan an induction or not. If you've never heard of it, well, I'm going to take you through exactly what it is. So, to start with, the Bishop score is a way of scoring. Now, I know that sounds really clinical and a bit strange, but scoring what's going on inside your pelvis and it's typically done in very late stage of pregnancy, so within the last couple of weeks of pregnancy, but most often it's done right around or just past the due date. And it's a way of looking and seeing if there is any progress happening very quietly behind the scenes that would make it an indication of whether or not it's likely your body is going to go into labor spontaneously anytime soon, or whether your body might need a little nudge to get it going, or maybe a really big nudge in the form of an induction in order to kind of kickstart your labor to help welcome your baby into the world. It was originally created in the mid-60s by a doctor named Dr. Edward Bishop. And so this little scoring tool has borne his name ever since. And we're going to walk through it. So it is broken into, 5 different parts. We're going to talk about the cervical position, right? And the cervix is the opening at the bottom of the uterus. The cervix is the thing that opens up or dilates in order to allow the baby to pass through. So you can give birth to your baby. And it's the thing that your doctor or your midwife or your nurse during labor is going to be checking to see how open it is becoming. So we're going to look at the position of the cervix, and I'll explain that in a moment. We're going to look at the cervical consistency, whether it is soft and squishy or firm and rubbery. We're going to talk about effacement of the cervix, or how long or short it is at any given moment. We're also going to be talking about dilation, so how closed or open it might be. And we're going to be talking about the fetal station, or where in space the baby happens to be. The baby in relation to the pelvis. So we'll go through all of those in a moment, one by one. But each of these has 4 different factors that we're looking at. And each of these 4 different factors awards a point or not. So the first factor awards 0 points. The second awards 1 point. The third awards 2 points. And the fourth awards 3 points. When you move through the Bishop score and you add up your score, you're going to receive a number, and that number can indicate whether or not starting an induction is a good idea, or whether you can, count on labor likely starting on its own, or only needing the tiniest little nudge to get going. So let's start looking at these one by one. We'll start looking at what those scores are, how you get that score, and then we'll talk a little bit more about what the actual score means, how to interpret those numbers. So the cervical position. Now, if we look at a human female pelvis, this is an example of one. It's nice and big in here, and this is how we know it's a female pelvis. Male pelvises tend to be quite narrow through here. They don't have enough space for a baby with a big old head to get through. So this pelvis, we're going to be used to show you some examples. So inside this pelvis will sit your pelvic organs, like your uterus and your cervix. Now the cervix and the uterus sort of tilt forward ever so slightly so that the cervix at the bottom faces towards your bum. And when you go into labor, or when you menstruate, or when you're at that midpoint of your cycle, when you're most fertile, the cervix actually rotates forward and lines up with the vagina. So if we use this to sort of show, right now, most people's cervixes are probably pointing towards their backs or their bums. And then the cervix will rotate forward to line up exactly with the vaginal canal or the birth canal so that the baby can come out into the world as opposed to trying to like go into your butt, which wouldn't be helpful. So as it rotates, the language we use are the posterior, the midline, and the anterior. So from the posterior, which is the back of the pregnant body, it rotates forward to the anterior, or pointing sort of towards the front of the body, which is in line with the vaginal canal. If your cervix is posterior, so it's sort of tucked back, it's hiding its little head and protecting baby and the uterus, then that's 0 points. That's posterior position. If it has started rotating forward, but not all the way there yet, we consider that the midline, and that gets 1 point. If we're rotating all the way and lining up so that the baby can come straight through into the vaginal canal, if the baby were indeed on the way down, then we call that the anterior position, and you get 2 points. You can't get any farther than the anterior position, so there's no points for the last or fourth. There's no fourth factor in this one, so the max points you can get for cervical position is 2. The next thing we're going to talk about is the cervical consistency. And so if you've ever heard of the term ripening, or you've heard a cervix described as ripe, then that's what we're talking about. We're talking about how firm or soft the actual cervix is. And if your midwife or your doctor were to give you a vaginal exam, they would be able to touch the cervix and determine how soft or firm it might be. Now, for you and I, for illustrative purposes, I always like to tell people, push on the tip of your nose and feel how sort of firm and rubbery that feels. There's some give, but it's quite firm. And then push on your lower lip, which is quite squishy and soft, right? Your finger, when you push in, usually sinks into your lip there. So the difference between that is firm and soft. So again, we're using the first 3 designations because we have firm, medium, or soft, right? These are degrees of ripening. So for firm, you're going to get a big old 0. Medium, you're going to get a 1. And if your cervix happens to be nice and soft, you're going to get a 2. The next factor is effacement. Effacement, I feel like, is the unsung hero of looking at what's going on in labor. What it means is how long or short the cervix is. Now, a cervix at its full length is about 3 centimeters long, or about 1.5 inches. Close to that. Part of that length is not necessarily fully felt from the external, because the cervix it sits inside the vaginal canal, like it dips down into it. But part of it is part of the structure of the uterus itself. And we can think about it, if we had a visual, we can think about the uterus like a balloon, and the very bottom where the cervix is, and that's, the neck or stem of the balloon. And what we're looking for is that neck or stem to just get shorter and shorter. As it gets shorter and shorter, it's easier for it to open up, which is why how short or long a cervix might be is super important information. So if we're looking at it, we're also, by the way, we're also tracking the cervical length in percentages a lot of the time. That's really classic. More and more newer doctors may be looking at cervical effacement in terms of how many centimeters long or short the cervix is. And again, I have these little models that I'm going to just show you a difference. You know, like a full length of cervix might be here, but half a length of cervix might look more like this. And so that's sort of what's happening. The longer the cervix is and the firmer, the less open it can be. The softer it becomes and the shorter it becomes, the more open it's possible for it to be, which is why this is so important. So if we're looking at maybe 0 to 30%, we're going to give 0 points for that. There's very, very little change in effacement. If we're looking about 40 to 50%, so the cervix is gone and it's only about 1.5 centimeters long now, then we're going to give 2 points for that. If the cervix has really, really thinned out and there's 1 centimeter or less, then we're probably looking at about 60 to 70% of effacement. We're going to give 2 points for that. And if the cervix is just what we call almost paper thin, so it's 80% or better, which means maybe there's 0.5 centimeter or less of thickness to that cervix or height to it, then we're going to give 3 points for that. Because we know that a cervix in that position, a really, really well-effaced cervix is going to be able to open up fairly quickly when things get moving. The next thing is the thing that everyone hears about all the time, dilation. And dilation is often thought of as the big star of the show. It's the popular kid in the crowd. So we have a cervix that will go from tightly closed to open up. Now, this isn't fully open. This is only about 4 to 5 centimeters of openness. And this potentially could be about 1 centimeter or fairly tightly closed. So if a cervix is tightly closed, we're not going to give any points for that. There's 0 points. If there is about 1 to 2 centimeters of dilation, so if your midwife or doctor were to do a vaginal exam, they were able to get 1 fingertip inside the cervix, that's about 1 centimeter. If they're able to get 2 into the cervix, that's about 2. So this is about a 1 centimeter opening here. If we were to go 3 or 4 centimeters, so this is definitely bigger than about 3 centimeters, which is about 2 finger widths. Then if we're 3 or 4 centimeters, we're going to give 2 points. And if we're 5 centimeters or more, so if the cervix is open like about this much or more, then we're going to give 3 points. And yes, it is absolutely possible to be dilated 4 or 5 centimeters or 3 centimeters. It's kind of common, actually, for some people to be dilated that much and not really notice it, to be walking around not in imminent danger of a baby falling out of you, so don't be worried, but it's super normal. And I always feel like those are the lucky folks, right? Those are the people who they got through the early part of labor without actually experiencing the sort of painful side of things that some people do experience. So bravo if you go in for a midwife appointment or a doctor's appointment very late in your pregnancy or just after your due date, and you hear that you're 3 or 4 or 5 centimeters dilated. Good job. That's a great sign that labor might start spontaneously. And you won't need to have things like an induction, or if you do, you might just have to have a tiny little nudge. Now, the final factor is the fetal station. And what we mean by the fetal station is how high or low within the pelvis the baby's head is sitting. Now, there are these things, and we can't see them when we look inside the body, but there are these things called the ischial spines. They're right here. You can sort of see them there. If we're looking through the top of the pelvis down toward the bottom, the ischial spines are here, and they approximately line up with where the opening of the cervix sits, right? So where the opening of the cervix is usually at about level with those spines. And we refer that to that as zero station, right? That's kind of like ground zero, beyond which we start to get positive numbers, but before that, we have negative numbers. So if we take the lovely Bob, baby Bob here, and we put Bob in here, I'm going to line him up. Let's see. Okay, so right now, Bob is approximately lined up with the ischial spines. So Bob is currently at zero station. If Bob were a little bit higher in the pelvis, this might be more like, I would say this is probably about -3 station. And you're going to get 0 points for a baby who is up at -3 station. This means that the baby is not well engaged or pressing firmly into the cervix necessarily. And as the baby moves downwards, they press more and more firmly into that cervix until they get to a point where they start to press through the cervix and we start to see positive numbers. So this is about a +1 or +2. And what that means is the baby is extremely low in the pelvis. And quite frankly, if you were to have some contractions and get going in labor, you might actually give birth to that baby very, very quickly. So in terms of our score, if a baby is -3, so they're about this much or so above where the cervix is, or above those ischial spines, that is a 0 point. If it's -2, so it's getting a little shorter, getting a little closer to that 0 mark, then you're going to get 1 point. If the baby is -1 or 0, so they are at that cervical opening lining up with the ischial spines or just about to, you're going to get 2 points. And if you are below 0, which means a plus, right? So a +1 or +2, that means that the baby is definitely close to being born, and you're going to get 3 points for that. Now, when we add all of those up, we're going to get a mark. And we can modify that mark by a couple of factors. So if we can modify that by if you've ever had a baby before. So let's say you've already had 1 or 2 babies, then we can give you an extra point to your score. But if you are a first-time mom and you are after your due date, then we take 1 point away. If you've never had a baby, we take 1 point away. And if you had a premature rupture of membranes, we take 1 point from the score. And all right, I'm just looking at some notes here just to double check that. All right, so what do the numbers mean? What does it mean to have this kind of score? So let's have a look and let's see if you are a person who maybe your cervix has started to move and it might be in the midline. It is starting to get softer, but it's not fully soft. It's still medium. So these are 1 points. Now we've got 2 points. Your cervical effacement is around 50%. So your cervix has started to get shorter. So we'll give you 1 more point. You have 3 points now. And you are, let's say you're a centimeter dilated. So you've just started opening up a little bit. That's another point. Now that's 4 points. And let's say that the baby is around -2 station. Again, that's 1 point. So now we have 5 points. Let's say this is your first birth. We're going to take a point away. Let's say that you are 41 and a half weeks. So you're getting close to what we call post dates or post term. So we'll take another point away. So now you have 3 points. So if we have 3 points, well, that's not a great score. That might mean that if you were to wait to go into labor spontaneously, it's probably not going to be happening in the next couple of days. It also means that if you were to be brought in today for an induction and you started with cervical gel, which is a special gel that helps to get the cervix changing, ripening, and can trigger the start of labor. It's often the very, very first stage of induction and can often happen like the day before a scheduled induction. So if you were being brought in to get an induction started and you had a Bishop score of 3, it might be very unlikely that the gel would be enough to kick you into labor, and you might need quite a lot of help when your induction does get going. Now, let's say your numbers were different. Let's say your cervix has rotated all the way into the anterior position. That's 2 points. And it's really nice and soft. That's another 2 points. Now we already have 4 points. Let's say it's not super effaced. It's only about 50% effaced, so that's 1 point. And let's imagine that it's not super open yet. It's only about 2 centimeters, so that's another point. But let's say that the baby is at about a -1 station. So the baby is getting really close to being at that sort of mid ground zero point that we really want that baby to be at. That's another 2 points. So we're looking at 5. Do we have 7 points now? And let's say that you've had a baby before. Now we're going to give you an extra point. All right. So now we have 8 points. Okay. So a score, it says a score of 9 or better indicates that labor will likely happen spontaneously. So that means in the next couple of days, you have a higher likelihood of going into labor. If you are 8 or better. If you have 8 or better and your midwife and doctor think it's best for you to have an induction, it is very, very likely that that induction will go pretty smoothly. So why do we have these numbers? Well, we use these numbers to help us make a determination about whether or not we should be considering induction. And so your midwife and your doctor are looking at all these factors. Now, they might not be thinking formally in terms of a Bishop score because they have looked at or touched so many cervixes and examined so many pelvises of pregnant people. And they know these factors implicitly. So they know automatically that a very short, soft cervix that is already a little bit open with a baby who is lying kind of low within the pelvis is very likely a baby who's going to not need extra help. Or if we want to give a little extra help, we won't need to use a lot of help to get going. They know that implicitly. So they may not be thinking in terms of what your score number is, but don't be afraid to have this information with you. Bring it up on your phone if you want to and say, can we do a Bishop score for me? You might want to think about this if your doctor does an exam at around 38 weeks and then starts talking about what the course of the next month could look like for you. if your doctor gives you an exam and says, oh, well, there's no dilation, you might say, so what if we looked at my Bishop score? What might that number be? And you can go through all those factors and create a score for yourself with your doctor. Or you might be meeting with your midwife, a week after your due date and having a pelvic exam, having a vaginal exam, and you can ask your midwife to give you a Bishop score, and she'll know how to do that. Again, you can bring it up on your phone if you need a handy dandy guide, but she'll be able to help you figure out what that score is. It's really important that we have a qualified caregiver do this score. While it is absolutely possible for you to sort of examine your own cervix just to see if there's any action happening there, is it really quite high? Has it gotten a little lower? Is it open a little bit? Is it softer? Some people do examine themselves in this way to give themselves an idea of what's happening inside. However, it's really important that someone who's trained to understand what everything means in terms of degrees and percentages and centimeters and things, they'll know exactly what they're looking like because they've had a chance to, feel hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cervixes, to know the very subtle differences between longer and shorter, softer and firmer, and how high or low the baby is within the pelvis. But you can use that information any way you like. So it can be used in a discussion with your care provider regarding whether and when to schedule an induction. If you have a really, really low Bishop score and you're 39 weeks and your midwife or doctor wants to talk about potentially inducing you for a variety of reasons, we've got to remember that there are lots and lots of very legitimate health reasons for hurrying up the birth of the baby a little bit through induction. So you can look at those numbers and help to determine, is this a good idea or should we wait another week and reassess? And, given the number and knowing that we are definitely inducing on a particular day, what kind of tools might be the best tools to use in this situation, given that we know what's going on with the cervix and the baby inside the body? The other thing you can do with this information is you can use it to make choices about what you're doing. So maybe it's 38 weeks and you were offered a pelvic exam and you were given an exam. And if you said to your doctor, I want to know what my Bishop score is, and your doctor says, oh, well, I'd say you're about a 2 or 3, maybe even less. You might think, you know what? Let's go up to the cottage this weekend. I feel comfortable going a little farther away from home because I know it's really unlikely that things are going to progress super quickly for me in the next couple of days. Or again, you could be 38 weeks along. Ask your midwife, hey, can you tell me what my Bishop score is? And she says, oh, you're like a 7. You're doing really great. You're really starting to have changes in your cervix. And it looks like birth is, coming along for you. Then you might think, oh yeah, let's stay close to home. Let's not, take a day trip out to Niagara Falls to look at the falls. Let's chill out and relax at home. And not go far away from our caregivers. So that's how you can use that information. And it can be an incredibly powerful tool for some people. Other people, I totally get it. Some people just don't want to know, and that's fine. Some people feel like really comfortable with their caregivers understanding this information and just keeping it in the back of their heads and only really alerting you to the things that they think are super important, when there is a health concern or when there is a factor that is actionable, like there's something that maybe high blood pressure, right? a lot of people might not want to have a lot of discussions around health numbers and things because they feel like it might make them very nervous or anxious. And that's cool. You get to take this information and use it if you want it, and you can say no thank you if offered information that you feel is not going to be helpful to hear or use for you. So if you are at the end of pregnancy and you're getting an internal exam, then understanding what this score means can be a really helpful tool for you to help determine if you are comfortable moving forward with things like inductions, with things like stretch and sweeps, making personal decisions around whether to leave the immediate area for a little while or not. And it helps to empower you. I feel like it empowers you with information to make really great choices for yourself, right? If your doctor is saying, we could induce this weekend, if you like, you're in a good zone for it, but you have a really low Bishop score, you might think, you know what, let's revisit this next week. If I don't go into labor on my own. If you have a really high Bishop score and your doctor is saying, I want to, book an induction for next week, you can think, you know what? We can do that. And I don't have to be scared of that because it's very likely that either I'll go into labor on my own before then, or if I get in there, then only the tiniest amount of medicine or sort of helping the cervix do its thing is going to be needed to get me induced and get me into a labor pattern that my body wants to be in. So I hope this was helpful information for you. And if you have a topic that you want to learn about, you want to understand more, let us know and we'll make that the topic of a future episode. Next week, oh my goodness, why am I not remembering what is happening next week? I'm going to find this information out for you and tell you exactly what's going on next week. So the lovely Megan from Family Doulas of Ottawa will be here, and Megan is going to be talking about what a high needs baby is, like what that means. If you've ever heard the phrase high needs baby, she's going to be dismissing or not dismissing that. She's going to be explaining it. She's going to be dispelling any myths about it and helping us understand what it means for your baby and you if you were to have a high needs baby. So I hope you join us again next week, Wednesday at noon, here on Birth and Baby Talk. Take care.